Tomorrow, and I welcome you today at the Harvey Foundation for the fourth and last panel of this conference devoted to Dick Something Else Press and to Dick's concept of intermedia, which this press exemplified. We are deeply grateful to our distinguished speakers who participated to hold the conference for accepting our invitation to share with us their thought and work, and help us bring further the record of the press. It's going to be a very brief introduction. We are late and we want to give time to our panel tonight. We are deeply grateful. The conference was made possible thanks to the generous funding from the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Art and the full support of the Emily Harvey Foundation Board. I think I'm going to read it now. Alice will introduce today's panel, and I think perhaps directly to panelists. I don't know. So, Alice and gentlemen, thank you.
Welcome back to the fourth day of this conference. As Christian already mentioned, I'm going to skip straight through the abridged version of today's panelists' bios. And for any additional information on the participants' work or on the program at large, we invite you to consult the program. Cain-Nielsen is editor-in-chief of eFlux Journal and has organized eFlux book series as well. She remains a periodical musician and writer living in Queens, New York. James Hoff is an artist from Brooklyn, New York. He's a co-founder, director, and editor at Primary Information, a nonprofit arts organization founded in 2006 to publish artists' books and writings. His editorial role at the organization centers on the facsimile publication of artists' books and magazines from the 1960s through the 1980s. Primary Information has published facsimiles of a number of Something Else Press titles, including an anthology of concrete poetry, fantastic architecture, the Great Bear Pamphlet series, and Alan Capra's How to Make It Happening, as well as other notable publications from the past, such as Avalanche, Broken Music, Destroy All Monsters magazine, Just Another Asshole number 6, the New Women's Survival Catalog, Women's Work, and yet, among others. Jonas, Magnusson, and Cecilia Grönberg, in addition to editing OEI and OEI editor, are writers, translators, and artists. They are currently working on 2 long-term artistic research projects founded by the Swedish Research Council. The expanded book, Stratigraphy, Locality, Materiality, and the Latent Image, Uncovering Developing. Books by Magnusson and Grönberg include I Am Writing in Your Words, 2000, The Gothenburg Leviathan, 2002, Rewritings, Transcriptions, Lists, Documents, Archives, 2006, Pun Bombs and Photo Flashes, A History of Puns and War Games, 2009, In the Bag, Brent Patterson's Collage and Typewriter Art, 2012, Event Horizon, Distributed Photography, 2016. David Reinfurt is half of Dexter Sinister, a fourth of the Serving Library, and one of Org Inc. Dexter Sinister started a small workshop on the Lower East Side of Manhattan and has since branched pragmatically into projects with and for contemporary art institutions. The Serving Library publishes a semi-annual journal, maintains a physical collection, and circulates PDF texts through its website. Org is a small software company. David currently teaches at Princeton University, and his work is included in the permanent collections of Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum, Museum of Modern Art, Walker Art Center, and the Whitney Museum of American Art. David was the 2016-2017 Mark Hampton Design Fellow at the American Academy in Rome. Matvei Yankelevich, am I pronouncing it? Sorry, I didn't ask you. Is one of the founding editors of Ugly Duckling Press, a nonprofit, editor-run publisher of poetry, translation, essay, performance, and books by artists based in Brooklyn. At UDP, he has had a hand in hundreds of books, chapbooks, and print projects. He curates UDP's Eastern European Poet Series since 2002 and was co-editor of the 6x6 magazine that was published between 2000 and 2017. He's the author of a few poetry books, most recently, Some Worlds from Dr. Vogt, Black Square, and several translations, including Today I Wrote Nothing, the selected writing of Daniel Carnes, which was published by Argus Overlook. He teaches translation and a course in artist books at Columbia University's School of the Arts, and he's a member of the writing faculty at the Milton Avery Graduate School at the Arts at Bard College, And finally, our moderator, David Platzker, is a curator and art historian. His work centers on the art after 1958, with an emphasis on pop, fluxus, minimal and conceptual art. What informed this movement and successive generations of artists whose work follows formally and intellectually from these precursors. Between 1998 and 2004, Platzker was the executive director of the nonprofit bookstore Printed Matter, where he organized numerous exhibitions and artist publications, in addition to co-founding their annual book fair. In 2004, he founded Specific Object, a bookstore and a gallery dedicated to ephemeral materials of the 1960s forward. From 2013 until February 2017, Platzker was curator of drawings and prints at the Museum of Modern Art, where he co-curated the exhibitions There Will Never Be Silence, scoring John Cage's 433, 2014, Sights of Reason, 2014, Gilbert and George, The Early Years, 2015, and Adrian Piper, A Synthesis of Institutions, 2017, which traveled to the Hammer Museum of Art, Los Angeles, under the title Concepts and Intuitions, 1965, 2016, and 2008. Thank you.
So good afternoon. I know many of you have been here for the other panels. I know you're probably tired and burnt out from hearing a lot of people talk at you. So the rules of the game this afternoon is that each of the presenters will be given 20 minutes. I have a timer. The timer will beep at 10 minutes, it'll beep at 5 minutes, and it'll go off at 20. Please stop talking at 20 minutes. The goal is for everyone to be able to bring to you their information about their activities. But really what I want is a conversation with all of you about what's transpired over the last few days. To integrate those conversations between what everyone's doing now and history and legacies for which they all fit together within. My introduction is going to be rather brief, and I'm going to show you two movies. I'm going to indulge me by enjoying the movies as much as I have. I kind of want to set the stage also by reminding us that the world that we're living in today is radically different than the world that existed in 1964 with the first publication of a book from Something Else Press. Jefferson's Birthday was a very traditional publication, and the publications that came successfully were more and more interesting, aggressive. So that's sort of the first point. The second point is the world that Dick Higgins was living in was also extremely radically different from the world that we're living in. From another standpoint, that standpoint has to do with inclusion. That with really one exception, all of the Something Else Press books were white men. The real big exception, of course, was Gertrude Stein, who had at least 6 publications with Something Else Press. Allison had a publication, and the only artist of color was Ben Patterson, who was included as a contributor within a publication. I don't think this is a failing of Something Else Press, nor do I think it's a failing of Dick Higgins, as much as it speaks to the time in which publishers were active in the 1960s. It was not an era that looked at the possibilities broadly of what art is and the possibilities of makers. It's not to say that there weren't makers who were people of color or women, anyone with an alternative stance. And of course, you have to remember that Dick Higgins himself saw himself both as a traditionalist but also as an alternative to the publishing mainstream that was surrounding him. One of the things, however, that anchored Higgins and Something Else Press was means of production. And that the publishing matrix that Higgins was operating within, and I think we've already lost what I was going to show you. We're back. Is that this is how you made a book in 1964. So, hopefully this is going to work. Harvey made a book in 1964. Yes, I did. It was not radically different than how you made a book in 1947. But this is not really it's an HDMI. So I'll narrate this one. It won't work on this computer.
It comes with the audio comes there.
I'm not connected to that. Yeah. There's a way to do it. You're ready. Plug this in on the street and settings.
No, this computer doesn't take this.
Oh, it doesn't?
Yeah.
Yeah, do it.
I can't because the sound is coming out from the projector.
Oh, okay. All right.
Actually, James, would your I'm going to narrate this. So this is a 1947 film called, I think it was How to Make a Book. And this was the high-end technology of how books were being made in 1947, but it was pretty similar to how the initial books and Something Else Press were being made before offset lithography took over. So the author begins by coming up with this brilliant idea. The author finds a publisher. The publisher then sends the book to be typeset. The type is done in molten lead. The lead is then key graphed into a matrix, which is what we're seeing here. So the lead now is gone over, and it's going to be transferred into a copper plate, because printing from lead, of course, is a soft material, and to get the maximum number of publications out, it needs to transfer to a copper plate. So now it's going to be incised into a copper plate. Now it's in wax, and the wax is going to be transferred into copper. So the point of all of this, of course, is that making a book, 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, into the 90s, was an endeavor. That the means of production were controlled by whoever had the money to put forward to publish the publication. As a limiting factor, books weren't inexpensive to make. Here the matrix are being put up in a 64-sheet spread. The other aspect beyond just who controls the means of mechanical reproduction and the cost of mechanical reproduction was, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Was time. That from conception to when these rollers start rolling and the sheets come off the press and then they get shifted over to the bindery, which we'll see in a moment, this all took time. It took collaborative effort. It's about editing. That an idea has a possibility of being put aside for a period of time before it gets transformed into a physical object. And this has one tremendous value, and that value is the ability for people to think about their ideas in expanded time frames. We live in a world that's radically different today. The time frames that we're operating in have incredibly shrunk down to almost nothing. Also, like the female labor peers, they're not on the press, they're the ones working in presses in the library, stacking the paginations together. This is originally a 30-minute movie, and I've cut it down to about 6. There's our paginations going through line. So, what's incredible is, you think about, all this doesn't happen in a day. All this doesn't happen in a week. This happens over a period of months. And at the end, you're left with a physical object that now has to go off and be distributed worldwide. And the utopian notion, of course, that something else press had, which is a similar utopian feeling that printed matter had when it was founded about 10 years after its press was founded, was that if these things simply entered into circulation, people learned how to read art. Right? And simply the notion of 1,500 copies of Jefferson's birthday would enter into the commercial world and people would engage with it. Which is certainly one of the reasons why Higgins decided that so many of his books needed to be republished or reeditioned again and again with many thousands of copies. With hope that just simply just mass quantities reaching the population would spur thought and spur the desire. Here they go. So I'm a firm believer that our world changes in time frames of about 15 years. So if you think about Something Else Press and its founding in '64, maybe that 15 years becomes almost 20, because of course what happens about 20 years later is this. So this is one of the first Apple Macintosh commercials, and extolling how you could have your in-house design department do something in a number of days or weeks, and that's now been transformed into a morning. You only had what's about $35,000 in 1986 dollars to own a huge desktop of computers. Here you're looking at two Mac SEs and a Lisa in the back, all networked to a hard drive, which was a whole 4 megabytes of hard disk space. and then a laser printer. So you're looking like $35,000 to $40,000 of technology at that time. And of course, we all know that by 10 years after this, the technology had shrunken down to almost nothing. Cost of distribution for all this had radically changed. So this is my setup for the conversation we're going to have today. We're living in a world where books are now being published in an afternoon. You could go online and either do it through a distribution channel. We all have laser printers or inkjet printers at our disposal to make as many copies as we want. One thing I should say about having been in printed matter from 76 to roughly 2000-ish, have this firm belief that artist books should be books that should be done in editions of 100 copies or greater and relatively inexpensive. So it cuts out all the LibreRT stuff. The idea that 100 copies or greater, unsigned, unnumbered books, with the thought that these things are democratizing agents. These should be able to enter into the world as inexpensively as possible. Again, with this utopian notion that if there are 100 copies that would enter into the world and people learn to how to read art. Around 2000, 2001, we saw a radical shift in the books that were coming to us from artists. And that radical shift was desktop publishing. That someone would, in an afternoon, come up with an idea. By that evening, they printed out one copy. The next morning, that book would show up in printed matter, and the artist would say, "Will you carry my book?" And initially, we would still say, "Well, you have to make 100 copies." And the incredible fallacy of that is, why do we demand that? Why do we demand that there has to be 100 copies of anything? Technology allows us to do 1 or 10 million. It really doesn't make any difference. It's a bunch of zeros before you hit the button print. And the only thing that I can come back to is how I began this is by saying that editing is the primary function that people need to learn. It's what a publisher does, it's what an editor does. It's the only thing that should ultimately control content is the ability for people to sit back and think about who they need to get print. So I want to sort of begin backwards. I'm going to begin by asking James Hoff to talk a little bit about primary information, which is both thinking back to the inception of many of the things that we showed you, but also thinking forward about how artists engage with the printed page today. Thanks.
So 2001 was also when I started working at Printed Matter as well, which I'll speak to briefly if I can find my notes. As mentioned earlier, Primary Information was founded in 2006 to publish arts books, and our mission is twofold to an extent, or at least we started off with a twofold mission. One fold was to publish facsimile editions of out-of-print artist books and artist magazines, primarily from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, though we wouldn't necessarily be opposed to publishing works that came later. We have published, or sort of begun to think about publishing works that have come later. And the other fold is to publish works by contemporary artists, both mid-career, late career, early career, emerging, what have you. The idea was to sort of start a sort of intergenerational dialogue between both the sort of early artist book forms and the sort of later artist book forms and the artists that are making books now. And one of the things that sort of prompted this this mission started in 2001. It started when I began working at Printed Matter. I was very I guess I was sort of new to artist books, and I was publishing at the time, but I was also new to publishing. It was still very much, for me, something that I was working through in a way, and there was a lot of self-discovery going on in that process. So working at Printed Matter was part of that self-discovery, and I would say where I got a great deal of my education as an artist and certainly as an editor, a bookmaker, and a publisher. But at that time, I was starting to see a lot of books from the 60s and 70s and 80s, or magazines or artist works coming through that I really wanted to have access to, and I really wanted to read, but I couldn't really. I had access to them in printed matter to some extent, but for the most part, I couldn't afford them as just a casual audience member. So I started to think, thinking about this sort of democratized notion of the artist book. I think around that time, I guess it was maybe in the 80s and 90s, where artist books started to become more rare. They started to accrue more value on secondary markets as artists became more famous. That people that were making artist books in the 60s and 70s or even the 80s became more famous. These sort of democratized works, these books that were put out in larger editions, became rare and accrued value, and made them inaccessible for people like myself and people like most of you, I assume, artists, students, general audience members interested in the work. So when I was seeing all this material, the first idea was there should be a way to get this material back out into the world. So it took a few years, but eventually in 2006, I co-founded Primary Information with Miriam Katzev, and we began publishing. Our first book came out in 2007, and it was a book called Real Life Magazine, which was an anthology of the magazine Real Life that operated primarily in the 80s in New York and LA. And then the second two projects were both Something Else Press projects. Something Else Press was very sort of near and dear to my heart. And also the first 3 or 4 projects, we really wanted to sort of set the tone for what we were interested in, both in terms of like newer projects and older projects. So we wanted to do a sound work, we wanted to do a periodical, and we wanted to do something that was kind of loose and fast. And so those loose and fast books, or the sort of model that we chose, was the Great Bear Pamphlet series, which was published in the 60s by Something Else Press. There were 20 in total, and these are facsimile editions that we did, some still bearing the terribly marked down price for the book fair last weekend. When I pass these around for everyone to take a look at. The second project we did, which was, I guess not technically published by Something Else Press, but was later distributed by Something Else Press, How to Make It Happening, by Alan Caprow. It was originally published as an LP by Massart, and then it kind of went out of business. Or just went out of business, and there was a large deal of these LPs still around, apparently. So I guess it was never truly distributed. Some of them went to Caprow's basement, or eventually his basement, and some of them went to Something Else Press for Alison Knowles' silkscreen to sort of alteration on the cover, and it was then distributed through Something Else Press. So we decided that we wanted to do a CD version. And we also put it online to publish a transcript of it as well. So that was the third project that we did, which I guess I can pass around if anyone wants to hold a CD. But it didn't stop there. The mission, like the artist books in general, like artist book history in general, took on a variety of forms in terms of what we chose to publish. So we published things across a variety of media, including soundworks and postcards and artist editions, some of them smaller, some of them larger, of course, a ton of artist books and non-artist books and periodicals, works by contemporary artists, works by that artist, sort of runs the gamut. We published, I guess, if you count all the editions, a few hundred things at this point. We also published a lot of stuff online, source material related to a good number of things. Something Else Press stuff. We published the newsletters online. We also reprinted or published several Cecilia catalogs from the late 60s, some works by the Project Disband, a few other things. Sort of runs the gamut. Something we're still working on, and we're getting ready to sort of launch into a very big project, which I can't really say what it is, but it will be very expansive and will center around performance and Franklin Furnace, and we should hopefully have that next year. There's a great deal of work that goes into doing the online stuff, surprisingly. So I think that one thing, well, I guess maybe we'll talk about this later, but I want to say that one thing I think that is interesting about artist books that we can take away is Higgins and the crew basically chose a form that was sort of there as a cultural form, like the form of the paperback book or even the hardcover book, if you will. And they figured out how to distribute artwork into it. So they took a distributable form on the heels of the paperback revolution, which I think is really important to sort of think about as the backdrop to the artist book movement. The fact that books have become far more available to everyday people in the decades prior. And they figured out how to distribute art into it. And I think that, formally speaking, because of the way society has progressed, things have become faster, if you will. Networks have taken on different forms. There's a lot of cultural space that's created through our day-to-day communication or any number of things. But I think that finding those spaces is really important, and I think that those spaces that get created are kind of like really ripe for artists to sort of intervene into. And I think that one of the things about the artist book is that quite often artist books aren't books at all. And I think that the more we can expand the notion of what an artist book can be or an artist project inside of that framework, I think the more interesting the future will be in that regard. The one thing I do want to say, I'm going to pass out a bunch of books for people to look at because as a publisher, my interest mostly is like getting books into the hands of people. And it's far more interesting than showing a representation. And there's been a great deal of talk in the last few days about books, and oddly, maybe like not a lot of books around. So I thought it would be fun to start like showing some books. So, there's also two other Something Was Press books here that we did, an anthology of contemporary poetry by Emmett Williams and fantastic architecture. So I'll pass those around as well. Can someone help me maybe pass some books out? These are actually two publications that I saw early on in my days at Print Matter that I desperately wanted to have and to study. One was Avalanche magazine, which was published in the 70s, and the other is Broken Music, which was a sound art catalog, or a catalog on record arts that came out in the late 80s, published by Go Music in Berlin. They're very different things, but they're both things that sort of crossed my desk, and it was sort of both of these were sort of impetus for us, and we started to try to publish these very quickly after we started the press. I have about 10 years of emails to the editor of this book before Ursula finally let us do it. And then Avalanche happened fairly quickly after we started the press, but it was a very involved process that involved publishing 8 magazines and 5 newspapers bound into a single book, all housed in a single box. So pass that stuff around. This is our newest book. It's not an arts book. There's our 10 minutes. I'll let everyone just look through that stuff. Okay. We got more. I may ask that you don't steal books, but if you do, please steal the ones that are still in print. So I'm just gonna, while we're all looking at books, I thought I would actually play maybe one. This is a double 45 record that was published originally in 1976 by Hans Mayer. It features Dieter Roth and Richard Hamilton and a very expressive dog. And it was a band with the 3 of them. It was a double 45, published in edition of 500, and it kind of became a cult classic. And we reprinted it or republished it a couple of years ago. But I've never really, I don't think it's ever really been heard like in a room full of people, at least that I know of. At least I've never participated in that, so I thought it'd be kind of fun to just listen to some tracks off that while we look at books. So I'll end there, and we'll wait for the timer to
That's a really hard act to follow. A little disclaimer. I'm not actually going to talk about Ugly Duckling Press. If you're interested in the work or haven't seen the books, I've been kind of a traveling salesman for 20 years, and I'm getting a little tired of it, so I didn't bring any books. I figure if those of you interested in literary publishing will check them out or already know them. We do have some interesting crossovers with primary information with whom we've collaborated on several occasions. Bringing Modern Love by Constance de Jong. I'm rather nervous to present in this room for reasons that will become obvious from my talk, from which I hope that some of my positions, I work with a collective at Ugly Duckling, so they're my positions, not necessarily these positions, will become clear. Is it hard to hear me? No? Okay. And if during the Q&A or talk with everybody, hopefully maybe some of those things can be specified. It's interesting to think about the economics and time and labor of publishing that David alluded to. Something else press books costs, Higgins says, $2.25 approximately, on average per copy for 1,000 copies, which is about $10 to $11 in our day, which is quite a lot for even a hardcover book, even 1,000 copies, although he was using pretty good materials. But that's partly because the labor and pre-press work, also the photographic process that wasn't in that film, is also was extremely costly, and that's much of what desktop publishing has cut down on. But that is to say that not to diminish the economic difficulties for small presses today, because even though we might also be spending $2.25 on a book for 1,000 copies, Modern Love might be like $3 a book or something for 1,000 copies today, and not 10 or 11 as you would expect with inflation. But nonetheless, due to arts funding issues with literary publishing and also the costs of overhead and circulation overhead in New York, etc., there are other, and that doesn't include any of the labor costs, of course, in terms of editorial in the case of Grönberg press, gets paid for that. So So anyway, I'm just going to say some things which you already know, but I hope to reframe them a little bit, and I'll start reading. So it'll be a really dry presentation with no PowerPoint. In 1998, the year of Dick Higgins' death, the NYPL opened an exhibit titled The Secret Location on the Lower East Side, which celebrated and historicized the Romeo Revolution and small press movement of the years between 1960 and 1980. In his preface to the book of the same title, Jerome Rothenberg suggests that the marginal presses of the type included in that show were the bearers of the mainstream of American poetry, and that the part by which American poetry has and will be known is the creation of those poets who have seized or often have invented their own means of production and of distribution. Thus, Rothenberg, amplifying the vitrine's rarities, positions the value of the small press in its marginality, and more precisely in what poet scholar Michael Davidson has called its revival of aura, through the utilization of cheap, portable print technologies to render authentic gestures. I would argue that the formation and life of Dick Higgins' Something Else Press, Incorporated, which was included in the NYPL show and in the book, Secret Location on the Lower East Side, is inextricable from the context of the Nimia Revolution, while also running counter to some of its rhetorical and production strategies in a few important ways. It's possible that these divergences have aided SCP's escape from easy historicization and relegation to the vaults and vitrines of the research library, at least as far as literature is concerned. First and foremost, SCP's conscious insistence on quality materials and bindings is out of place among the staple, poorly rebrewed, low-end exponents of Neo-Revolution publishing, which Davidson has described as part of an expressive poetics that validated personal gestures of discovery and speculation over artisanal values of order and control. Second, Higgins critiqued Machunas' publishing work as that of editioning, calling the Fluxus editions not books, but prototypes. They were produced by hand, and because the process was never meaningfully industrialized, they were not widely available. Yet Higgins was not interested in claiming the authenticity of his own publishing endeavor by juxtaposing low-end production and design against lead artiste publications or high-end private press, as many small presses were doing at the time and would continue to do for decades in order to assert the politics of their aesthetic. Third, neither did Higgins completely disavow commercial publishing, a gesture popular with counterculture presses. He wanted to be near it and to compete with it, which is why he chose an office with a water cooler at 160 Fifth Avenue. 160? Is that right? In the publishing district near the Flatiron Building, over a secret location on the Lower East Side. The business card that he printed for his first editorial director, Barbara Moore, sported a company catchphrase below the name of the press: America's quality avant-garde publisher. This was a far cry from the usual counterculture small press motto as exemplified by Ed Sanders' credo for "Fuck you, a magazine of the arts. I'll print anything." The question remains, if Higgins' subtitle for Something Else Press was antagonistic or ironic, who was it fucking with? Commercial, mainstream American publishing, fine press traditions of quality printing for quality content, or the democratic counterculture of anything goes? Perhaps all three. This absurdist gesture was at the same time an earnest description of SCP's production values and the content it was prepared to defend. It is important to clarify that the Mimeo or small press revolution's democratization of publishing in the 60s most succinctly expressed in Diane Takuma's phrase, "power to the people's Mimeo machines," was a product not of technological advances themselves, but of the resourceful engagement of writers as editors, printers, and publishers with those technologies. The same can be said of artists' uses of the book, or what came to be called the democratic multiple artist book, as exemplified by much and overly talked about in Boucher. Like small presses and little magazines that define themselves by their autonomy from mainstream literary institutions, artists making their own books pushed back against museums and galleries that exploited artists for financial and cultural gain, while serving as gatekeepers that limited the audience for and ownership of art. Both movements expressed political positions by their aesthetic choices, their distribution strategies, and their production methods, even when they were not, they thinking that they were publishing political content. It is no surprise that these democratizing movements made great strides alongside rising political unrest and cultural upheaval. What is surprising and perplexing is that they, the small press publishers, and the artist book publishers, including artists who publish their work, are rarely talked about in the space of the same paragraph or the same page or even the same book of critical and historical assessments of print culture in the 1960s and 70s. Mentions of 0 to 9 and Fuck You in studies from both literary and art angles are some of the few outlier exceptions that prove the rule. Dick Higgins and Something Else Press Incorporated was perhaps among the first publishing projects in the U.S. to challenge the separation, which he must have perceived before either movement was historicized, of literary small press and artist book publishing. Higgins Press was, by his own definition, a small independent press. He thought of it as a model for a kind of publishing that he desired, one that was always doing something different from what others were doing. He was comfortable with the adjective alternative and posed his acquisitions against what normal publishers would take on. Ken Friedman, in his introduction to Cecilia's Dick Higgins Reader, calls Higgins a trade publisher. Quote, he intended Something Else Press to be the smallest and most experimental of big houses. The press distributed its books internationally through established firms rather than Fluxus-style committees. The press published most editions in runs of 3,000 to 5,000 copies, end quote. In reality, things were a little different from this picture of Something Else Press's booming business. For example, Ray Johnson's The Paper Snake was printing an edition of 1,700. And whatever the print runs, much of SCP's stock had to be given away to libraries or remainder after Higgins filed for the company's bankruptcy in 1974. As for its self-definition, we might consider that SCP was a member of COSMET, a committee of small magazine editors and publishers, which had been organized in a grassroots way as the first professional organization for small press publishers in 1968. That's that 10. According to independent publisher Harry Smith, when the COSMET board became aware of the fact that, quote, women were excluded from printing colleges, Higgins led a printing workshop for female members of COSMET at its 1973 conference, quote, beginning at a large full-service printing company and culminating in the paste-up of the whole COSMET catalog, obviously not the whole earth, which became a small press bestseller, end quote. I don't know what that means, small press bestseller. The small press, it's hard to find a copy. The $70, actually, we get it. The small press, united in COSMET, did not see themselves as the smallest of the big houses, but as a viable alternative. Among their membership were presses calling themselves independent, like Toothpaste Press, which later became Coffee House, one of the most well-funded contemporary nonprofit publishers, as well as literary small presses and little magazines aligned with the anti-capitalist neo-revolution values, could be tabloids, and also back to the land book publishers. Higgins' main distributor, so that's about Higgins, or where SCP is located as far as trade or small press. Also to Friedman's description of the distribution. Higgins' main distributor, the Book Organization, a cooperative endeavor designed to strengthen bookstore sales for a group of small art presses, was founded by Michael Hoffman, editor at Aperture, jointly with Jargon Society editor Jonathan Williams, also in 1968, at the time that saw the establishment of other cooperative small press initiatives. The Book Organization was like SPD now, a charitable organization and could receive grants and donations, some of which Higgins thought were made by people who meant to help SCP. Yet, the Book Organization was not professional SCP, Something Else Press. Yet, the Book Organization was not professional enough for Higgins' ambitions, and it was certainly not an established commercial book distribution firm, as Friedman implies. Higgins felt he was losing money because of their ineptitude. He preferred direct mail orders to trade distribution, as bookstores took large commissions. When the press moved to Vermont in the early 70s, one of the employees hired some dozen salesmen and a local distribution arrangement, and created a local distribution arrangement in New York. Quote, Higgins says, crucially important, especially at Christmas. Higgins was obsessed with getting the books to the general consumer and fantasized, as they do see the part in other proponents of the artist books, a book about SCP books at supermarkets. He was overjoyed by the Berkeley Co-op selling Great Bear pamphlets in the vegetable aisle. However, SCP was financially dependent on grants from individuals and foundations to subsidize its low profits. He had a list of, quote, important cigars to light if money was needed, and a series of bank loans, which would be used partially to pay off previous bank loans and pay the salaries of the employees, never more than you could stuff it at a tax account. Additionally, SCP's activities were made possible by a steady flow of Higgins' inherited money into Lower Now. I mention all this to dispel the myth around SCP's trade press status and his legend of 100 salesmen going door to door around the nation with SCP books in their car boots. Though Higgins may have believed in that myth or wanted others to believe it, hence the earnest business cards, hardcovers, office water cooler, and the population of the office with phantom employees. In reality, SCP functioned not unlike many small independent presses of the time and of our own. When it had a hit like the Country Poetry Anthology, SCP struggled to foot the printer's bill, causing it to print consecutive small and therefore costlier runs and lost money to distributors because of low organizational capacity. These mistakes were not outlandish, and the financial troubles he faced due to the tiny profit margins and other disadvantages of the economy of scale were and are experienced by both non-profit small presses and for-profit independents. Higgins came to think, as did others, that publishers like SCP and Cecilia Printed Editions Cooperative should be supported by the trade publishers to do research and development for the industry. Research and development are his words. We, Higgins wrote, meaning a whole substrata of smaller publishers, can provide them with paradigms and models to imitate. Higgins' 1973 Something Else newsletter, the last during SCP's lifetime, is an open letter of disgruntlement with the business of publishing books, quote, the most corrupt of all in the country. A distress signal which still rings true for small press publishers. He rightly assessed that publishers don't make money on books. Slight turn in my argument, which I think I have a few more minutes for. Higgins thought a book you should buy is one you would be likely to read at least twice. Otherwise, go to the library. Owning a book is owning more than its information. It's something you can work with, flip through, a space for contemplation that brings you, the reader, to making ideas of your own more than once. It's a little like owning a painting you look at every day, but much cheaper, more democratic, and with words. Yet one could even say that the book, the industrially produced codex, lacking the aura of singularity, is the perfect conduit for dematerialized art. Since it's just like any other book, it's not an art object. It can be well crafted, intriguing in its design, but it's not art. Literature may come in the form of a book, but it's not, apologies to Harvey, etc., equal to the form of its container, not the copy you're holding in your hands. In 77, Lucy Parts' essay, The Artist's Book Goes Public, asserts that the book remains the cheapest, most accessible means of conveying ideas. In an essay titled Something's Else About Something Else, published in a takeaway brochure of the 91 Granary Books exhibit at Something Else Press, Barbara Moore writes that she was baffled by the conformism of Higgins' choice of format, the well-made cloth-bound book, as a vehicle for avant-garde ideas, already referred to today as a traditional object. No doubt others in the Fluxus and Happenings orbit perceived Higgins' allegiance to the old form of the book as conservative. Moore writes, Dick was committed to the most radical art concept of the time, intermedia, yet he wouldn't tamper with the formalism of the book. She came to the realization that SCP books were, quote, wolves in sheep's clothing that, quote, infiltrated the establishment, laying the groundwork for the artist book revolution to come. The Secret Location echoes this idea in describing the radical achievement of SCP books to slip avant-garde content into what looked like regular books and then to get those books in bookstores and libraries around the world. The entry for SCP in Secret Location also implies the press's dissimulation and sneaky subversion when it described FOEW and OMWHMW being disguised as a prayer book. Moore's view of the book as conformist seems strangely blind to the small press revolution happening all around them, though in the poet publishers of the early 60s were also reading Stein, cranking out sheets of it on a mimeograph machine, going to Happenings and theorizing art as daily life and poetry, while they weren't cranking sheets on a mimeo machine. Might we not imagine the artist book revolution as taking a cue from the alternative book market created by marginalized poet publishers, and not from the trade paperback, as Lucy Picard long ago suggested in 77. Why then is it so hard in order to see Higgins' interest in the conformism and formalism of the book for what it was, an earnest engagement with precisely the technology of bound adjacent pages that had spread gospels, new beliefs, science, and aesthetics since Gutenberg's Bible through Luther, Erasmus, Stern, etc. I would argue that the book was not formalism for Higgins, but it was form, the form he needed to and trusted to get ideas across, i.e. to circulate authoritative arguments for the beliefs of intermedia, to assign value through presence to what might otherwise remain marginal. Black letter fonts and stuff, we can talk about how that, those references to scholastic learning and so forth are important in those books. So just to round out, it seems Higgins was interested precisely in the adjacency and sequence of pages in the book's architecture and saw in it many, perhaps infinite possibilities. Moreover, the adjacency of titles in the SEP list and the newsletters and cards as meta text made possible alignments and associations between its generically eclectic titles and constitute the most eloquent argument for a real alternative. Because we're in an art space and we're talking about a potential exhibition, it's easy to acquiesce to the notion that SEP was laying groundwork for artist books. But I would say that any influence on artist books is at most a byproduct of SEP, which might be seen as contemporaneous with and adjacent to the rise of artist books in the small press. While editions Hansford Meyer and other European art publishers followed for the most part fairly conventional, leaved artiste traditions of supporting and selling the work of artists in book form, Higgins published literature and ideas as much, if not more, than he published art, and was rarely engaged in making collectibles. He was working in publishing in the milieu of small press publishers and independence at a time of optimism about the possibilities of autonomous value production. He wanted to reach the market, not to infiltrate the establishment, but to make his own, and in the end, perhaps he did.
Okay? Loud enough? Yeah? Okay, now for something completely else. Warming up, coming along. Slowly. Yes? Harvey claimed that pioneers are always working on singularities. We don't believe that the OER project is pioneering in any way, but we do work on singularities, on things that haven't yet been fully recognized, historicized, identified. This is why the question of readability has always been present in our work on various levels. From the very little challenges to readability posed by certain forms of visual poetry, to the verbal visual montages in many types of materials and disciplines in the physical magazine and in the social contexts related to it. Whether the magazine deals with the notions of documents and dispositives, or games and play, editing aesthetics, or a reader's undigest, extra-disciplinary activities in Brazil, or nonsense and invented languages, issues on paper, or on tape, or on the magazine itself as a research dispositive and intellectual technology. We believe in outsourcing as little as possible, and in the analog publication as a conductor of critical and generative tangibility effects.
We started out in 1999 and have published. We started out in 1999 and have published 85 issues of the magazine, as well as some 100 books of more or less experimental poetry, book sports, theory, etc. Throughout the years, we have also, as an integrated part of our publishing practice, organized a large number of events, presentations, seminars, exhibitions, conceptual cabarets, etc. All of them in their own ways calling attention to questions of reading. As reading for us is always global and material specific, and thereby, of course, also demands a certain level of curiosity, open-mindedness, and work from the reader. Each now being the now of a particular recognizability, as Benjamin once put it. Talking about historical readability is something that is attained only at a particular time, and access to legibility will also constitute a specific critical point.
One of the strands in the OBI project has been rereadings of historical and more recent avant-gardes, in an attempt to prolong some still continuing energies and also to rewrite or displace parts of existing histories by looking at previously unhistorized or neglected documents or archives, however local, singular or fragile these might be. Concrete poetry through the personal archives of Marianne and Salt, the Brazilian Poema Processo movement and its flexible folder publications through the personal archives of Neide de Sá, Vladimir Pino and Fabio Silva. Experimental Portuguese art and poetry in the 60s, 70s and 80s through the personal archives of Ernesto de Sousa, Alberto Caneiro, Fernando Aguiar and others. Experimental poetry in art in the 60s and 70s, Italy through the personal archives of Corrado Costa, Gianfranco Barrichello and Marco Giovanale. Readings of historical avant-gardes that in each of these issues constitute montages together with contemporary investigative materials, for instance from the non-affirmative writing context in the mentioned Italian issue.
In Sweden, many of the histories of more recent experimental movements remain to be written. So in order to create a better readability of these fields, we have also had to suggest, through the montages of different OEI issues, archaeologies and possible histories, not only of conceptual art in Sweden, but also of land art, mail art, typewriter art, and crucial parts of the experimental cinema. Another way for us to reread Swedish avant-garde practices has been the kind of performed publishing exemplified by Kalas på bord, Feast on Table. In 2016, a day of intergenerational performances of and micro-lectures on the 7 still unpublished manuscripts by post-surrealist, pre-concrete and concrete poetry in prose written by Eivind Fahlström in the late 40s and 50s. These manuscripts, deposited at the Swedish National Library, will, for different reasons, probably never be printed, but in order to offer a series of impressions of their textures and potentials, we organized a 5-hour-long event that circulated between 7 of the rooms at Moderna Museet in Stockholm, emphasizing also, for instance, the animal factory registers in Fahlström's writing by including a couple of live parrots, wheelbarrows with horse manure, and large quantities of jelly.
More recently, in spring 2018, we produced a 3-dimensional special issue at Moderna Museet, OEI number 79, edit, publish, distribute, highlighting the social material as well as the technical material aspects of the magazine. This by including, for instance, a third of the printing plates used for the printing of the previous issue of the magazine. Edit, publish, distribute, featured publishing-related works by 100 artists, poets and magazines from different generations and horizons. As we wrote in the preface, printed on one of the walls in the museum. To publish a magazine is not only a matter of producing a physical artifact, but also, and to an ever-increasing extent, a matter of intervening and acting for an entire ecology of publishing, where the possibilities of new and unprejudiced readings incessantly have to be created in new constellations and contexts.
The challenge here was to edit in 3 and sometimes 4 dimensions, to create a stratified montage where the editorial enunciation is circulating between magazines and books, some pieces and video works, projections and displays and exhibition cases, zooming in and out of pages and posters, and aiming to raise questions about visualization, reading, attention and criticality, distribution and the infrastructures of publishing. An number of important points of gravity were constituted by presentations of a series of inventive and generative, but far too unheeded publishing projects, including, for instance, Bert Pettersson's I påsen, In the Bag, from 1965, simultaneously an artist book, a booklet of visual poetry, an exhibition, and a concrete form of distribution, The Bag. 3 remarkably unknown Swedish publishing projects that managed to think editing together with publishing and distribution in new ways are Art Distribution, Wedge Press and Cheese, and the magazine Vargen.
Art distribution was initially something the Swedish followed to the British overground magazine Gandalf's Garden, which combined editorial work with meditation gardening and lecturing. Art distribution in Stockholm from the mid-60s onwards produced a series of remarkable artist books, taking in consideration also their printing time, etc. Art distribution refused to compartmentalize and produce catalogues of their publishing ecologies, organized happenings, exhibitions, poetry reading, theatre festivals, created experimental sound art, and had their own bookshops. Crucially, they also conceived of the carnival as a mode of distribution, opening dates for all ages. Here we can see some of them dancing, whirling down the street on Whitsuntide in 1968, chanting quotes from Joyce and Beckett on their way from Reinfurt to Gärdet, an open area for concerts and other various outdoor activities. The founder of art distribution, Percival, was born in 1931 and still works hard on liberating the publication from the limitations of the book industry.
Vargen, the Wolf, started in 1973 in order to design, print, produce, publish catalogs, magazines, books, etc. The most interesting project is Vargen magazine, 8 Swedish and international issues between 1974 and 1975. As anarchist as post-conceptual in their approach, under the slogan "Occupy the Brain," Cecilia and North Berlin featured Mailer, body art, parapsychology, alternative energy systems, combining humor, temper, and extreme editorial openness. They wanted to offer an alternative and a challenge, an example and a source of inspiration.
The last issue of Vargen, intended to expose the myth surrounding the production of a magazine, was produced locally at Moderna Museet in 1975 with materials from the visitors of Vargen's experimental communication exhibition. This exhibition, including a large number of contributors from all over the world, aimed to display and use a long series of models and methods of information: video, wall newspapers, mail art, culture, cabarets, idea benches, etc. Vargen described it as the first exhibition in the 1970s which in a broad way assembles and illustrates the concept total information. The concept exemplified also by the Wolf's different letterheads, information cards, special stamps, etc. Besides a display of communicational networks and contents in more than 200 files and a 24-meter long photo montage, the exhibition included the building of a subway station where the commercials were substituted by prints of visual poetry and communication art.
The third and last of these 3 historical examples, Leif Eriksson's Wedge Press and Cheese, is perhaps more well known to some of you, being the most prolific publisher of artist books or book art in Sweden. But the interesting thing is how this publishing structure, conceived as a work of art, is connected to and conceived in relation to the creation of an archive, SAV, the Swedish Archive of Artist Books, as well as specific exhibition displays, some of the first editions of conceptual writing in Sweden, and the editing of a research magazine, Konst och bildforskning, Research in Art and Image. And in 1978, Leif Eriksson defended his artist book, The Waste Paper Act, as a dissertation at the ephemeral art institution, the One Day University.
We have talked a lot already about rereadings of historical avant-garde projects here, but in recent years, another prominent strand in OER has been investigations of possibilities to work outside what Michael Hatcher called the absolute city system. Not in order to escape institutional complexities, however, but to try out some new ones. We have sought to combine archival work and fieldwork in more topologically and topographically oriented issues of the magazine on experimental gardens, from Finlay to Gilles Clément, on the concept of nature, etc. As well as in a series of issues where we establish fields of tensions and entanglements between natural and technological registers, for instance between mountains and infrastructures, or as in our most recent issue, wetlands and experiments. Taking the cue from Bengt af Klintberg's famous Fluxus-minded events, the ice exhibition on the spring equinox in 1965, where he displayed sheets of ice in the trees of the forest outside Stockholm, and his 1974 intermediate event, The Forest Diver. We have organized a series of forest exhibitions and seminars in different nature reserves outside Stockholm, where we created local reading situations while important parts of our issue on wetlands and experiments had its preconditions in an experimental one-day festival on publishing infrastructures at Aarhus Kunsthal in Denmark, combined with 3 days of fieldwork in wetlands and peat industries in the area.
The only part of the Harald Seemann archive that didn't travel to the US was the section containing his local documents, archived in Bellinzona on Monte Verita, this Swiss mountain of many countercultural experiments in the early 20th century. The question that occupied Seemann during several decades was how to excavate and exhibit the stratified histories connected to this mountain. Similar questions are occupying us in one of our ongoing artistic research projects called the Expanded Book, Stratigraphy, Locality, Material, Specific Methodologies, a long-term project investigating local forms of publishing and visualization in a rural area in Sweden dominated by 17 geologically unique tabletop mountains. And here you can see part of the project's infrastructure, a mobile archive and editing unit. And this summer, the smallest but highest of these tabletop mountains, Olleberg, became the scene of a 2-day seminar on local literature and on fluxes.
Regarding Swedish avant-garde histories, the one thing that we thought we wouldn't need to work on was in fact fluxes, since Bengt af Klintberg wrote this history in his book Swedish Fluxes in 2006. Af Klintberg participated, as you know, in the Fluxes festivities in Düsseldorf in 1963 and organized 3 events of pre-Fluxes evenings in Stockholm later the same year with big films and some novels. In his great beer pamphlet, The Cursive Scandinavian Salve from 1967, he connects Fluxes to Scandinavian folklore. The recent publishing of Intermedia, Fluxes and Something Else Press, however, made us want to have another look at this history and the continuous relevance of Higgins's publishing models. This was why we, together with Bengt and other Fluxes-related practitioners and theoreticians from different iterations, enacted an experimental 2-day event of outdoor performances and lectures at Olleberg. a mountain otherwise mostly famous for its outstanding hang gliding and paragliding conditions, as suggested by this image showing the mention of Grönberg lecturing.
So, what did collective research situations, including the reading of 3 locally distributed translations of text by Magnusson, Grönberg, and Yankelevich, made clear to us was also that there were many threads and documents that needed more attention. From the fact that Jonas obviously wanted the Swedish composer Carl-Erik to be the Scandinavian editor of the never-realized Fluxus magazine, to the poet, artist and galleries Bengt Adler's 9 too little-known editions of boxes by Alison Knowles, Ben Robert and others, published between 1977 and 1986. But let us also show the cover of a book by Bengt Adler's Novelties that we published in 2013. The book, initially projected to be accompanied by works of George Brecht and published by the Italian publisher Multipla in 1977. But anyway, the editing of the results of these outdoor summer flux events will make up some of the material in the upcoming OEI issue on publishing practices, publishing poetics. And when we studied Yankelevich text on the Something Else Press, unpublished edition and printed editions at Grönberg, a series of things struck us. Beside these texts' more general continuous relevance for any publishing project, which is not afraid of a mix of hard work and great fun.
In OEI, we have talked about extradisciplinarity rather than intermediate. We have wanted to move away a bit also from the very notion of medium. But the resistance to compartmentalization and the open-minded curiosity for new meetings and collages between different art and non-art registers, the embracing of the explorative, heuristic, experimental aspects of publishing, thinking and making art, all this is a very strong resonance in what we have been trying to do since 1999, even though in very different contexts, of course, and those of the 60s and the 70s. Higgins' dialectics between American and European, famous, infamous, and non-famous, past and present, these, of course, would need to be both expanded and complexified, but they still are challenging, as is his documentation and analysis of both failures and successes, his way of approaching things without the assumption of mastery over them, instead embracing the knowledge production, acknowledging non-knowledge as a crucial element.
Higgins' work in creating criticality in building up new reading conditions, the conceptual environment of the preface, the prospectus, the manifesto, the newsletter, the news cards, the pamphlets, etc. This discursive work is still of great importance as a model. For us, publishing today is almost more a question of making a public than making public. We do distribute our publications in traditional channels, but we also publish in very local editions, low circulation, contextual and material-specific circulations, or circulations with friction.
The Higgins of unpublished editions and printed editions acknowledges that unconventional books need unconventional organizational structures, their flexibility in smallness, where one practitioner can wear several hats, the book, the writing, the design, the production, etc. Still, for Higgins it doesn't seem possible to regard his publishing activities as part of his artistic work. Annette Gilbert's book on publishing as artistic practice from 2016 would seem to signal a shift in perceptions, that a shift in perceptions has occurred or is at the horizon. From a Swedish perspective, however, there is at the moment less ground for such optimism. In Sweden, the genres again seem to be everything and what falls between them nothing. The artist book has lost its extradisciplinary energies, its investigative openness, and has once again become site for the admiration of authorized competencies.
For any critical and curious publishing project, there's cause for holding styles and signatures and unnecessarily high production values at bay, avoiding doing the golden thing, playing it less safe, creating new questions and frictions instead of contributing to the pragmatic circulation of things that are already too circulated. We do need alternatives to the cynical mantra that there is no alternative. In spite of everything, we need to steer away from all those value hierarchies that prevent us from receiving, considering, reading so many potentially productive singularities. There is, indeed, as Jonas put it, a great deed to be done in this direction in the way of opening up aesthetically rewarding possibilities.
So in 1963, just a few addresses down the street from this building, Alison Knowles premiered her performance called Color Music No. 1 for Dick Higgins. And I'll read you Knowles' score for the performance, as published in 1965 in the Great Bear pamphlet called Alison Knowles by Alison Knowles. Is my volume okay? Cool. Okay, so here's the score. List your problems from 1 to 5. For each problem, list the best solution you can think of. For each problem, also list a color. Whenever the problem arises in your mind, think first of the best solution, and if you cannot act upon it immediately, switch to concentration on the color until an absolute necessity intervenes. And that was premiered at 423 Broadway. So today, even though it's not a performance, and maybe not in faithful spirit of the score, we can consider 5 problems in contemporary art publishing through the framework of this performance. And the only thing is I won't list solutions to the problems. I don't know many, or in most cases any solutions. And second of all, I thought it could be fun to talk about them together. But problems we've definitely got, and colors, and there's, I think at this point, the absolute necessity of intervention. Okay, so problem number 1 is the sea of content. And for this problem, there's a sea like color, blue. Okay, for radical publishing practices to happen, there obviously needs to be the means and the determination to self-publish. But how would the Great Bear pamphlets have come about otherwise, for example? But these are different times and some in many ways. It's different convention. Is there a point of oversaturation? Is there a moment where in the scrolling sea of so many words and so many links, the work itself gets drowned out? How can we retain the spirit and the material and digital reality of small press and self-published work while avoiding total inundation? Or maybe this isn't a problem at all. Because on the other end of the spectrum we have problem number 2, which is the big guns. So a few months ago I was speaking with an editor at the University of Minnesota Press, who Efflux, where I work, has worked with to publish works of Russian avant-garde museology, architectural inquiry, and God willing, at some point an incredible and completely constructed dialogue between Julia Child and Craig Claiborne that Martha Rossiner first created in the 1970s. Anyhow, so the editor there at Minnesota has been in publishing for 25 years, at least, during which time there have always been monoliths in the industry who cast mean shadows on smaller presses. But Amazon, who this color slightly represents, is something else entirely, surpassing the power of any individual publishing giant that came before it. So I learned from this editor that even some of the huge commercial printers who, like the printers themselves, not the publishers, who churn out mass markets, corporate brochures, and textbooks have recently shuttered their doors. And the sole reason for this is Amazon's developing print-on-demand service, where when ordered, a book is printed on the spot from a digital plate, and is apparently looking increasingly like the real thing. Ostensibly, this saves warehouse space for Amazon and publishers alike. There's no initial print run necessarily, and no copies waiting to be shipped. When imagining the kind of terrifying scale of all this, I think in terms of an antidote of Ugly Duckling Press, of their collective approach, subscription series, and regular communal involvement in the actual printing of books, broadsides, and artist books on their letterpresses. So this is something that gives hope. Anyhow, obviously on a larger scale, as the reach of a giant like Amazon continues to expand, this puts more and more people out of business, for example, and there are other problems. So how does all this affect smaller or even self-published presses? I'm not sure, but the landscape is changing, for sure. And it always has, and will always continue to. But the next problem is how to follow all of the digital twists and turns, and keep not only one's head, but also a level one. When it comes to online publishing, one problem is largely one of format. How to direct the scroll, what kind of design to use, how to make words pleasurable to read across various kinds of screens and programs. And what about things like ebooks and PDFs? Notable collectives and publications, some of whom are here today, have subsisted for a long time, or at least did for a long while in PDF format, which to me feels like something almost akin to a physical object, or as close as you can get on a screen. But what about that format now? PDF, I mean, I'm actually curious just because I feel like there's not maybe quite as much PDF publication going on these days. But anyway, how do you archive a PDF and digital content in general? For example, at eFlux Journal, we're trying to figure out a better way of displaying the past 10 years worth of work on the journal, because otherwise it becomes easily buried in the horizontal scroll. Or vertical, where we have this horizontal one. I've worked on publications whose entire websites are defunct now. And it's sad to know of all the work that sits in a sort of invisible limbo because the web server is no longer maintained. There's also the ongoing drama of subscription services like Scribd, who gather up content, often without publishers or authors' permission, and have people pay to access it. So even for online publications whose contents are well preserved and who have the wherewithal to withstand various design trends and server migrations, it is a curious problem to think of where all these collective works and words will go. How will they be kept? Of course, digital archiving tools and systems exist, and some work very well, for now. But for posterity, both in terms of collecting, displaying, later discovery, or even chance reading, the screen and the scroll yet leave something to be desired. This goes for coming across new work in the present as well. Is there a vegetable aisle on the internet? Last month I visited my home state of Minnesota. Soon after arriving, my father presented me with 10 identical Great Bear pamphlets by Klaus Oldenburg. Having no idea I was coming here, etc. He purchased them at a university library sale, which he frequents, and probably they were the more recent reprints from primary information. Anyway, the total coincidence of this event pending felt miraculous, and I wonder about that kind of chance encounter, that kind of physical exchange and passing down that sometimes even happens intergenerationally, and how it might or might not happen with various non-printed formats that we use today for expediency, for conservation, necessity, desire, and a whole host of other reasons in publishing today. Okay, and so now we're at number 4, problem number 4, which is the deep persistence of overwhelming whiteness. There is one historical problem with radical publishing and radical art publishing and the art world in general, and a number of other fields that has certainly persisted into the present. David spoke to this in the introduction to this panel, and that is the persistence of overwhelming whiteness, and to an extent still maleness, straightness, and all of the other familiar markers of bastions of power. Certainly in the last decade, or maybe even last 5 years or so, there's been a notable change in terms of the racial and gender diversity in published authorship, with editors either committed out of desire for change and for more accurate representation, or for some, no doubt, motivated by fear of being called out in the post-tweet account, etc. years. This, especially the motivation for genuine desire for keeping up with the times and making platforms representative of diverse authorship that does exist, is heartening, and it will continue. But when I look around, I still see a lot of editors that look like me. I still see a lot of publishers that look like me. And by look like me, I mean white, middle class, able-bodied, etc. This goes for museum directors, to some extent curators, etc. And I think it's these powerful behind-the-scenes positions that have yet to undergo major change, so that the people running and making decisions about and also profiting more widely from ongoing work also reflect a more accurately representative group in terms of socioeconomic status, race, gender, sexual orientation, disability, countries of origin, etc. And I think this kind of urgently needed sea change in terms of publishing also needs to start from the bottom up, with, say, editorial internships being always paid for one, made accessible to people with a wide range of backgrounds. And I don't mean to say this like as a totality, because there's certainly precedents, projects and collectives that break the kind of white bread mold. And one, for instance, that I think of often is a publishing collective called Metropolarity that's based out of Philadelphia, and they do science fiction and a lot of other speculative work. And it's by young and mostly from poor backgrounds, mostly queer writers and artists of color. Okay, so there's another historical problem that's perhaps had more peaks and valleys over the last decades. I'll wait till we do the slide. So recently my colleague Andreas, who's here, was meeting with one of Eflux Journal's regular authors, who's a wonderful Italian philosopher in his late 60s. And this is a person who has spent decades in the streets and also in more theoretical environments. So as this person, who's Franco before Berardi, looked back at more overtly active political decades in his life, and then at the current landscape, which of course has an increasingly organized fascist far right, he had a major lament to share with Andreas. And it had to do with lack of strategy, and publishing strategy and writing strategy. So theory we've got in art publishing, especially some of where I work, in droves. But when it comes to publishing concrete political strategy, whether that comes as a series of instructions for demonstration or action, or more experimental forms of art making, or disruption, or even changes in thinking, Bifo feels we are lacking, and I have to agree. Sorry, I should change. How can we move out of our armchairs of various designs and use our screens and pages toward more strategic ends? I ask this, and many do, at a time that is of course defined by profound urgency, from the very grounds we stand on and water we drink, to the increasingly fascistic political environment worldwide. Can we, and do we want to, take example from youth leading climate strikes, for example? What is the role of all of us in thinking, acting, and publishing more strategically in these times? And I have in mind one concrete example of a kind of instructive strategy, which is a recent guide compiled by the artist Carolyn Lazar that's a guide for institutions of all kind of sizes and art spaces for making themselves accessible to artists and audiences with disabilities of all kinds. So that's it. And these have been broad strokes listed in no particular order. I guess some more urgent than others. And as promised, I have no solutions. So thank you for your time, and thanks to Christian and Alex for the invitation.
So this is the last of the presentation before we talk together. I thought, I'm a graphic designer. I came into publishing kind of through the back door. I've been working independently for 20 years. Thought maybe it was a good idea to share kind of the ways in which I've intersected publishing under a number of different names, and perhaps also pointing to how the conditions have changed during that time. So 20 years and 20 minutes, so we go pretty quickly. Not exactly real time. Okay, so I work, as was described in the introduction, I work under a number of different names. I've worked under these names basically for at different times in overlapping configurations. The first one, which is on the far left there, is called ORG, and I'll talk about that first. That's a project that's principally my own project, assisted by lots of other people coming in the door. The second project is called Extra Sinister. That's a project that I've done with Stuart Bertolotti Bailey since about 2006. I'll talk about that and how that has changed and morphed over the years. And the third project is called the Serving Library. The Serving Library was founded in 2011 by Angie Kiefer, Stuart Bertolotti Bailey, and myself. Currently it's 4 people: Francesco Bertolotti Bailey, Vincenzo Petronico, Stuart Bertolotti Bailey, and myself. Okay, so these projects have consistently overlapped, and I think this is something I've chosen to do, to kind of hide behind all these various monikers. And I think maybe what is interesting and will be apparent is that they shift registers. They have very different publics and audiences, and that has shifted also over the years. Okay. There in 20 years ago. This is a studio portrait of ORG. I'll describe what that was. That was a graphic design practice that I started in the year 1999. I just finished graduate school at that point. From the beginning, it was meant to be as much kind of a critique of these same practices as it was a functional graphic design office. It never operated very effectively, either financially or practically. However, it ran for about 6 years. This is a studio portrait from the people who were in the studio at that time. I had a space across the Port Authority. The thing was a bit of play acting, as you can tell from this photograph. We grew mustaches for the that tie was, I still have that tie. Anyway, this is modeled off a Dutch graphic design studio portrait at the time. I also took the name ORG Inc. because I thought at the time that seemed like perfectly generic and the name of a large corporation. I took an office, a studio in Midtown, A, because it was inexpensive at that time on 39th Street, and B, because I thought it was nice to have a Midtown address. I called the telephone company. I said, give me a telephone number with as many zeros as you could give me, which is here. And I made business cards, which this business card tracks the price of gold over the course of one day on the market, and then when the gold was less expensive, the letters are bolder, and it's more expensive, they're thinner, so that kind of thing. Okay. With ORG, I was doing commission design projects, and I certainly wasn't intentionally moving into publishing, but as I was doing it, I also kind of felt an impulse to make what I was doing somewhat public, or to have a public component to it. I staged events in the studio very regularly for about 6 years. The website, all the materials around this design studio were, I guess, on the edge of opaque, or at least didn't get me hired very often. This was the website. Okay. that ran for 6 years, at which point it had kind of run its course, and I had met Stuart Bertolotti-Bailey, who had invited to New York, graphic designer, British graphic designer. I invited to New York to just set up in the studio and use space. And we together formed a project called Dexter Sinister. I shut down the studio on 39th Street, had a party where I gave away all the computers and books and all that stuff. Closed it down, was going to threw it all away and moved into a basement on the Lower East Side, which is a bit of an accident, which is a whole separate story. But basically I wanted a studio close to my home at the time. I just had a child, and it seemed like the right thing to do to close down a somewhat operational commercial business and move into a basement. But it was founded on the ethic of working in a smaller, more concerted way. We had started to work on a graphic design project for Manifesto 6 Biennial, during which we set up Dexter Sinister as a publisher for that project. That project ended up falling apart for various reasons, and so we took that name and some of those ideas about working more concertedly, being careful about how many copies of any publication that we might work on were manufactured, and taking a more central role in the kind of act of publishing, determining how many things get produced, the finances of the entire equation, etc. Dexter Sinister is the space that you see down here in the bottom, underneath the Space for Rent sign. This is about the time when I saw that Space for Rent sign, and I inquired and thought that it was the storefront, and the real estate broker showed up and showed me a basement, and they said, okay, well, that's why it's that price, right? Anyway, turns out that this is an image of the basement at that time. I still use this as my studio about 13 years later. It was Spartan, but it was also inexpensive, which changed the economics of what we could do, the kinds of projects we could do. We also installed a glass storefront on the basement door there, and we realized we had Manhattan real estate, and we had been working together already on a publication called ... which was kind of started out as a graphic design journal, became many other things. And we thought, we could, since we had a storefront, we could set up a bookstore. And we started selling books on Saturday afternoons from this space, and announced ourselves as a bookstore. People took us seriously, and we started selling enough books on Saturdays to pay the rent, which then again changes the equation of what can happen in this place of practice. Here's an image of the bookstore. The bookstore was ever at its greatest size, like 3 shelves. We carried mostly books that we worked on. They were principally ... to start with, and then other things that we liked from small publishers, such as Primary Information from the beginning. We had lots of help in getting the bookstore up and being an operational thing, from Sarah Crowner, artist Sarah Crowner, who worked committedly for a number of years getting that up and running, and later Robert Snowden. Anyway, the bookstore was always a marginal activity. It was only 1 day a week, but it managed to carry an idea for us about working directly with a small but committed audience. We also held events in this space, which is a continuation of what I was doing with ORG before. These events we had once every 3 months, and we took them very seriously, and they ranged from, we had a night of abstract gambling with artist Michael Portnoy. That was one event. Or another event, we had we offered free haircuts if you changed your part to the other side, after the inauguration of Barack Obama. And then we gave you a mirror to look into, which would make you see your part reversed, a double reversing mirror. Anyway, the whole thing. That was typical of the kind of events. And we considered these as like publishing of what we're doing and making books and other materials. Dexter Sinister was, as I described, came out of a project for Manifesto 6 Biennial. This was the first publication we did with that project. It was before the biennial, which was set to operate as a 6-month art school on the island of Cyprus, had started. This was a book called Notes for an Art School. There's the front cover and the back cover of that publication. Soon after we had set up the basement space, we started to be invited to participate in art exhibitions in a kind of unclear role. We were graphic designers, but invited in with kind of ambiguous invitations, and we liked that ambiguity. We participated in the 2008 Whitney Biennial. This is one of the works that we made during that time. For that project, we set up in the space of the exhibition behind a closed door and ran a small press office or kind of public relations office for the biennial, which we worked with a constellation of about 30 to 40 writers, artists, curators to make press releases and to send these out in various ways. The Whitney institution, it turns out, was very supportive of this, gave us all their contacts, their email contacts, their fax lists, etc. Each press release that we made went out through a very specific channel. We thought that was part of the work as well. This first one was a double press release. Turns out that biennial was at 2 sites. It was at the Armory building and at the Old Whitney building. And so we released this press release that announced a great Klieg light that we were set to shine on the opening night of the biennial. Let me speed up. We didn't do that. We released 2 press releases. Each one told you to go to the other stage to quickly see the Klieg light was in the building. Okay. This is an image in that space. It was behind a closed door. We worked together with artists and writers who we invited into the day, or sometimes multiple days, to construct these press releases. They went out largely electronically, but some went out physically as well. All of that material was then collected into an issue of ... This publication right here, which ran through, this is the cover of issue 16, which is around this project, the biennial project. I'm going to continue on from that. When we finished that project, we archived all of those press releases as a microfiche, as a piece of small, condensed archival format, which we then used to construct a performance around, where we invited many of the people who participated with us on this project to come and speak their press releases or perform them. We did it first at the kitchen, and we did it later at the ICA in London. This kind of performance, which was, you see Michael Portnoy here reading from one of his press release during that. This was a kind of overlapping live performance of reading texts which were made under this one situation. Stuart and I were running around conducting it as it happened. It consisted of music pieces, of spoken pieces, of recorded pieces, etc. That describes a kind of trajectory of one project through a number of forms. The next issue of ... we kind of worked inversely. We decided to set up a situation where we would perform every text that was going to be in the magazine, and that was done for 3 days at Somerset House at the Cornwall Institute in London. So, for example, I wrote a piece around William James and pragmatism and a couple other things. And so I performed that piece. It's an overhead slide lecture that was transcribed. That became the printed text. And so the act of publishing was both, I expect, in the performance of it as well as in the printed matter afterwards. This is the cover of that issue. The next issue, well, 2 issues later actually, was based around a project for Performance Art Biennial in New York, where we set up a small newspaper office across the street from the New York Times in the Port Authority building, and designed and edited a newspaper called The First Last Newspaper. This is one of the 6 issues we produced during the 2 weeks that we were set up there. These were distributed through mostly by hand in New York. It was a magazine that was about the newspaper industry in some way. Another project from about that time was being invited to do an art project for the Frieze Art Fair in London. We were skeptical of the, I suppose a bit skeptical of the invitation when we received it. We received it with Shannon Ebner, an artist who we were working with also at the time. Together, we all decided to build this cabin, which was a replica of Thoreau's Walden cabin. It's built out of concrete cinder blocks. It's built in the art fair. We used it as a recording studio, which you see the inside of it here. The real project we did during this time was to commission a long-form text, which we will publish later, by the writer Angie Kiefer. And it was an 8-part text around the anatomy of an octopus, something that we had shared an interest in that animal and its kind of particular qualities, and it's a surrogate for thinking about what it might mean to communicate beyond the edges of language, an impossible task, obviously. So we set up a situation where Angie was asked to write one chapter in this 8-part essay each day, and then that edited version was sent to a reader in London, Mason Lever Yap, you can see here, who would go into the booth, record that as audio, and then send that over the internet back to Stuart and I in New York, and we would edit the audio to produce an audio version of this 8-part essay. Then at the end of that 8 days, we convened an event at the top of the Chrysler Building in New York, where we invited about 30 people, very committed, or opened it up, but about 30 people came to an office at the top of the Chrysler Building, and we played that audio back for this assembled room of people. I'm going to play a very small segment, very, very quick segment of that right now. To give you an idea what it said.
An octopus in plan view, part 1. The etymology of the word octopus. Octopus, noun. A mollusk with 8 sucker-bearing arms, a soft sac-like body, strong beak-like jaws, and no internal shell.
Okay, it starts with the dictionary entry. It's not ideal. But anyway, that was the end of that. And then we later published that text by itself. That project continued. Turns out the octopus in plan view really was describing an asterisk, that shape. We imagine that. And as Stuart and I continued to be, as Extra Sinister was invited to art exhibitions, we carried forward that idea through a number of other situations. This was in Austria and Kunsthaus Bregenz, where we produced an animated asterisk which told the story of all the exhibitions that had happened in this lobby space over the previous 10 years, which had to do with art designs that were done. That asterisk carried forward to another exhibition in Munich, where it welcomed visitors into this show, which was called On a Universal Serial Bus. This exhibition was based around a USB stick that Stuart and I also published at Extra Sinister, which is called Universal Serial Bus. It's published by Sternberg Press. That contained all the contents of this exhibition, which included videos and sound pieces and a few PDFs. And then later on from that, we published that chunk of material at the base of this flag in Ghent, Belgium, where there's a USB drop where you could plug in a USB drive and collect the material for free. Continued through 20 issues. Here are a few covers. Until 2011, when we invited Angie Kiefer to help us rethink our kind of lazily ad hoc and kind of a little bit too easily mixed approach to publishing material. We formed the Serving Library with the idea of being more committed and slower about it. The Serving Library exists as a printed journal. You see here the cover of the first issue, the second issue, and third issue. It also exists as a website, and the pieces that we commissioned for that are newly commissioned texts. And part of the equation was as well to ensure that writers were paid properly for each of these texts, and that was in a kind of, you can imagine, an ethical position. The Serving Library is a 501c3. We get some money. We get funded partially through that. All of the texts that we sell in the printed journal are also available for free as PDFs online through the website here. Each PDF is meant to be standalone. In other words, you don't need to read it in the context of anything else. When you download a PDF, it is time-stamped on the bottom, which you can see here on the bottom of this PDF. And then all those downloads are recorded in a public place on the back side of the website when you click on the clock up there in the corner. And we imagine this as kind of all of this, obviously, is investigating kind of modes of publication, so that each time a PDF is downloaded, it makes a digital copy. And so the archiving is a dispersed archiving. It exists on every computer. Every person is going to touch this thing. To download, it's an act of reproduction, and we like that idea. We also like the idea that they're free on the internet and paid for in a printed version. Turns out printed thing doesn't sell very well. Anyway, the Serving Library, the third thing is a collection of objects. These are objects which first appeared as illustrations on the pages of the journal. And so these things range from one-off paintings to mass-produced record covers. We find them, get interested in them from them appearing in the journal as images, and then go back and find the real things, add them to this collection, which we've shown at art institutions for the past 10 years, many exhibitions. We've always wanted these to be in a permanent home. We've yet to find it. The most permanent homes, our next one in Ghent, Belgium, where it will be for 5 years. We really want an infinite home for it. Latest issue of the Serving Libraries, number 15. It's a translation of a book by Bruno Minori, artist and designer. A lot of material continues to circulate around design. Okay, last thing I'll show. Actually, I'm at the end, I know. ORG, which started as a design studio, reformed itself as specifically a software project. It's run together with a few other people. Here we are recreating that picture. I didn't bother to wear a mustache. ORG circulates small software projects, circulates them through mass mainstream channels such as the App Store. This particular one is called Multi. It's just an app that makes faces. That's it from typographic furniture. Doesn't do anything else. Doesn't sell very well either. That's it.
We've spoken for close to an hour, which and a half, and we've got about a half hour of more time that we could use to take questions, but also I have a few questions that I want to address to our panelists to begin with, and then I hope some of the panelists have questions for each other. One of the great tragedies of art history schooling is that they teach you zero about economics. And I think that economics are both incredibly interesting and informative to know a little bit more about, particularly when it comes to publishing. So for the people who are engaged in physical publishing, can you just talk a moment about what it costs to make a book, what your cost per unit is, and what your return is if you sell it direct, or if you have to go through a wholesale.
I have to say, I actually studied economics at the college level, and it had very little to do. It's helped me very little in actually being able to ever make money publishing books. I guess if you really studied that side, you probably just wouldn't go into publishing. But in terms of the practicalities of it all, Primary Information, we are distributed through several distributors internationally, like in Europe, Asia to some extent, Australia, and of course North America, and some in Eastern Europe as well. We receive, in North America, we receive 25% of the retail price of each book.
Right, so you're making 25 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, but it's actually less because we have to pay for pallet shipping down to a warehouse in Tennessee, so it's usually about 20 to 21 cents.
Right, so that's what your return is on the sale of the book. That doesn't account for the actual cost of making the book.
Of course.
So how many units do you need to make and sell before you break even? And put aside the fact that you're a 501c3 nonprofit, which means a lot of books are being subsidized.
Well, our books are sold at cost, so we have to sell everything to break even. And even then, we tend to lose, a little bit of money, or we can sometimes make a little bit of money. It kind of comes out in the wash in the end. But yeah, our model is very, very specific in a way, in that we're trying to break even with everything. So,
as a magazine publisher, what's your dynamic in terms of the economics?
There is, OEI is run as a non-profit artist and project, so we do not make money out of the publishing practices that we do. We try not to lose too much money to be able to continue the work, but in terms of funding, how is it possible to do? We have support as a cultural magazine from the Swedish Arts Council. So that's this public support system that exists in Sweden. If you are a magazine, you can apply for producing a publication that has a certain periodicity. So you need to publish a certain issues, amount of issues a year. And then you need to be subscriber based. So we have a certain amount of subscribers, nationally and internationally. And then parts of the print run would go around to different bookstores and so forth. But I mean, printing is expensive, yes, but I would say that the workload that goes into producing an issue of OAI that's the major cost. In terms of the books that we do you want to?
No, it's all.
Right. Ugly Duckling is similar, I imagine, to
I think the question is an interesting one, but in the 5 minutes we have for it, you will learn nothing about the economics of book publishing, especially the differences on this panel. Like they're so wide, and compared to what something else was doing. Yeah, we have approximately, with inflation, we're probably spending a fifth of what he was spending on a book. But we're also doing a lot to cut the corners, using found paper, using printers that are doing asset-free and decent work, but like are geared towards small runs, trying to do like 100 more copies here or there, or print extra covers to avoid costs later, or do all the handwork ourselves. So that we'll do all the wraps for like a book jacket at the table, rather than asking the printers to do it before it's shrink wrapped. So we save like a few $100s on the hand labor or something. So there are just so many ways of talking about the economics. I mean, distributors usually commercial distributors take 50-40% sometimes. In the case of DAP that's buying outright and not returning, they're taking 25%. They're giving you 25% of the retail price. What they get for it from bookstores is like probably 60% of the retail price. So their margin is pretty small, but your margin as the publisher, which is what Dick Higgins writes about in 1973, is tiny. And book publishing is not, like, no matter how you slice it, the point is if you start talking about numbers, you should just go into commercial publishing. There's no reason to do this work. Right.
The joke in publishing is, how do you make a fortune? You start with a bigger fortune. So the parallel question to our digital friends here is, you have a proliferation of digital projects, and the whole issue about finding means of getting these things into the world gets more and more difficult as time progresses. You have one problem being just the migration of information from system to system. I have plenty of things sitting on my computer I can't open them without a Macromedia director. And then the second thing is that the things that you have been able to migrate, how do you keep these things accessible beyond just the Google search? Have either of you solved this problem, or do you have thoughts about it?
I probably have thoughts about it. Definitely not solved it. I like PDFs even. I've liked to use PDFs for quite a long time, I think. It's a format that's been around for 20 years, right, at least, and has changed very little. And when we started the serving library and started serving up PDFs, which were at the time not indexable on Google, like the contents of, people told us we were incredibly Luddite and backwards looking. But it's the tenacity of that format to last 20 years, which I really like. And there's something also not being in step with the current moment, which gives it a bit of friction. But with a PDF, it's just that multiplication across different machines that does the archiving for you. And so I like that it's a relatively accessible format and will continue to be. So things like the Internet Archive Wayback Machine, which is keeping copies of it redundantly. It seems to me the only way to archive these materials through kind of dispersion, through mass reproduction in different formats at different times, in different regions, and different circumstances. And that doesn't happen if it's the latest, greatest kind of plug-in, whatever, or if it's done in somebody's ecosystem.
Yeah, we like PDFs too. I think we use them in a little different. When we do the journal, it's published online just on the website, but then there's also a PDF generator. The programming of which is like a little bit complicated, and as we each time we do a new website, it becomes more worrisome. Like, how do we integrate this? So we're working on updating that as well. But in terms of one thing we tried and I think kind of failed was ebooks. At least for eFlux, we spent all this time and resources trying to make these objects into ebooks and not lose too much of their tactility or their spirit and so on. But then I think 6 people downloaded them, which is great for them, but so yeah, it's still up in question.
So just for reference, the line at MoMA and MoMA's publishing department was that ebooks were an incredible disaster. And if MoMA could figure out a way to monetize them and make them viable, then that says a lot about the possibility of what this medium is at this moment. So the parallel question about that moves beyond just sort of the economics is the role of a publisher as the authority. That as a publisher or an editor, you're making decisions about inclusion and exclusion. That is, you have to divide your line between what's interesting to you and what's viable as a commodity. And part of the issue also is not only just sort of the notion of the authority of the publisher, it's the authority of the physical book, physical object. And I think a lot of the reason why Higgins was so interested in the notion of making really well-crafted physical objects was that the notion that these well-crafted physical objects had authority. That you put them alongside Abrams' book, which was the other major art publisher at the moment, and they come up as strong, if not stronger, than most of the Abrams publications. And the one big asterisk would probably be the Capro Happenings book, which was sort of a major moment in time of great book publishing in terms of both within the mold and outside of the mold of traditional publishing. So speak to us a little bit among this group about authority, your decision-making process about what you want to include, what the decision-making is about the things that you would really like to publish, but for one reason or another made a decision not to. Anybody?
I can say that we talked about issues that were quite big, yes. But then, it just took a couple of years before we needed a certain amount of space because of all those different registers and types of materialities. And, well, everything temporalities that needed to go into this specific montage of reading that we aimed at. There is also a very pragmatic limitation in this magazine. Normally it's 560 pages or so. That is just under 2 kilos. And that is the Swedish postal limit. So, I mean, it's not all pragmatic because well, this specific format was also the result of a couple of years of really researching what we needed in terms of volume. We said, I don't know when it was, 2011. Yeah, fuck that. No limitations, and that was a disaster, of course. So we did this at the time. You couldn't print or you couldn't bind more than was it? 8 centimeters. So that was 3.1 kilos, and we killed us because it was impossible to distribute. We had to travel around it took us a year, I think, and we had to organize specific networks and sites of meeting points around Europe, etc. Which was good. It was a good thing because we learned the language by heart, people who subscribed, etc. And of course it was impossible to work, but it was a good thing to know one's limits, one's physical limits once and for all. That's it. I think, but authority, yes, I haven't touched upon that at all. Of course, it's a pretty good thing that physical artifact manages to store things, materials, ideas in a specific way when you put this thing, as I do now, on the table. Of course, this is a little bit of a memory we can bring to after all. So I probably spoke about this concept of tangibility effect, and we do believe in these kind of conductive energies but authority, yes, that is an authority, but in terms of editing, I mean, we are running the magazine and also publishing books since many years back, we do, but there are also specific issues that wouldn't be possible to manage all the local research for. We set together, we bring together a specific set of people, of course, for specific research tasks in Brazil, in Portugal, etc. So I think the authority is distributed, of course, in so many ways that I talk about it, but we still insist on running the project and taking responsibility for the choices. And of course, there are always exclusions, not only because of this specific physical form, but I can tell you about that would be a too long list.
Any competitors you guys want to speak to?
I think, at PI, for information, we have maybe a slightly different, kind of a similar take, but also slightly different in that we're, I think it's odd it would be odd to think of us, it would have been at one point odd to think of us as being authorities, but of course I see us in that context. I understand why we would perhaps be seen in that context. And I think when we learned that, at a certain point, that we were really well known for a very specific focus on, say, something like Fluxus or conceptual art or even contemporary poetry, we started to research projects that were openly critical of the schools and those positions. And we've had, to some extent, luck with publishing those, and there's other projects that are coming up in the future. One of which I talked about with a couple of people on the panel. In the Fringes, which is Stockhausen Serves Imperialism by Cornelius Cardew, is something that's coming out in the spring, which is a Marxist takedown of Cage of Stockhausen, written in 1974 by Cardew and Scratch Orchestra, John Silver, etc. That's like one example. Another would be something like the New Women's Wow catalog, which takes on male-dominated counterculture of the late 60s and early 70s with a very specific secular feminist approach. Also, we're working on a very large international anthology of female concrete poetry from the 60s and 70s because that school is very much male-dominated. In the anthology is one of the editors is in the audience, so obligatory. Those are some of the initial things that we are starting to do, or we've done in the last 4 or 5 years, and that only speaks to the historical framework of our project. But on the contemporary side, we're staffed with 2 people, but we're trying to begin working with freelance editors and also create positions for editors that share maybe have a different framework and are maybe interested in exploring our part of different histories that can sort of help the organization evolve in its particular focus on contemporary aspects, and hopefully help. I think in general help the artist movement evolve into a different framework moving forward. I think it's doing that already. I think there's a lot of small publishers that are doing that. And I think Print and Matter has done a pretty decent job of distributing those works and highlighting publishers who are doing that. But I think that's something we're definitely focused on in the course of the next year or so.
Briefly, without talking about EDB, I think the question of authority quickly generates some kind of notion of the editor has to apologize for their authority, that the editor or the publishing house is somehow responsible for some kind of societal wrong of hierarchies, but actually, if we didn't have primary information, we would not have not only the histories we know, but the alternative histories that they're putting out, and so it seems to be really important to have presses that last. That something else press was 10 years, which is actually a pretty good amount of time. Primary is a lot of these projects are 10, 20 years, and I think that in order for them to be able to assert some kind of meaningfulness of the work that they're publishing, they need to stick around and acquire more of this terrible thing which is called authority. But they're in a context, as you know, I mean, I think you've worked with some large institutions where a lot of these projects are in very different contexts. Some of them are supported by those kinds of institutions which lend authority, and that's a whole other issue. And I think that's where maybe we should start thinking about the problems of artist book publishing. But in terms of, but then there's also like a huge grassroots community of presses that are making, as you suggested, also are making things and claiming authority. But I think also examples from the 60s, like Broadside Press, Dudley Randall, who said that from his librarian salary, I'm going to publish Gwendolyn Brooks and I'm going to publish Etheridge Knight, and I've made out of a writing workshop group, basically created a platform among one of many, but an important platform for Black experimental writing and for Black writing in general, poetry specifically in the States. By just claiming that authority, like I'm Broadside Press, no one can say different.
Okay. So before we open it up for any questions, do you all have questions for each other? Do you have any feedback? Okay. What do you all have to say?
Just to follow up on the issue of authority, and I really like Matvei's point about let's not just criticize a generalized idea of authority, but you spoke about how text is sinister, and then you distinguish between institutions that lend authority. And obviously your work with Whitney Biennial and things like that, you said they were ambiguous invitations. I wondered if you can tell us a little more about whether they changed the way Dexter Sinister operated or felt, redirected you in any way, or how that played out?
Well, I think authority is a good question for the practices I showed and what I work with. I think they each play with the idea of authority in different ways and claim it, and use graphics and like the name to claim authority. So when I said we set up Dexter Sinister as a bookstore, people started MIT Press and said, people carry books. I'm like, this is absurd. 3 shelves. Each of those, whether it's ORG, which obviously is a kind of blatant grab at like commanding some sort of authority and using it in another way, or Dexter Sinister, which is a catchy name, which also did some other thing, and the serving library. Each one claims a kind of positive authority as an agency in that case. And so we're not publishing in any of those projects, we're not publishing other. They're always the works that we're publishing are discrete texts, and they're included in our publications. And again, if you want to talk about authority, they go out with that very specific frame. And I think that's a lot of what, maybe coming from graphic design, I've thought about that as like what we can add to the situation in addition to editing, but which is to frame a text and send it out in a very to send it out under read it because it's within this other thing, right? And so I think the art invitations, like say the Whitney Biennial, the way in which those changed what, I don't think those changed what we did very much. They gave a different avenue or a different area for it to exist in. But in the case of that Whitney project specifically, we were invited to either they said, oh, do you want to design the catalog? That was one invitation. Second invitation was, do you want to make a parallel catalog, like a separate catalog that you just make and publish, or do you want to do a project of the show? And we decided the project of the show was the weirdest for us, the strangest invitation for us. But we wanted to do it, which is doing what we normally do, which was go to an office every day and work with other people to give form and shape to their ideas. And so in that case, we did that, but obviously we did that in a kind of expanded and more multivalent way. So, and the other projects, which became more like exhibitions, we always tried to work backwards from the things that we do. So that one that I showed, which was the on the Universal Serial Bus, we wanted to make that USB stick, and got the invitation to the exhibition. We decided in reverse that would be we just show what's on the USB stick, and so maybe that answers that.
Well, then coming back to the idea of authority, something you brought forth. I'm wondering simply by hearing first the way you presented it as a way to also some of you responded to it. Did you hear me? Oh. I wonder if the term authority should be understood in its plurality and in different meaning. You refer to authority in Dick Higgins, presenting Dick Higgins in relation to a position in relation to the more famous established press. I'm wondering if it was not, if authority in this case was not a strategy. So in other words, is there other ways to see authority and maybe speak of authorities in any specific way of defining it for you, the idea of producing a book which is going to be positioned in relation to something else, to another press. That's one thing. And I'm wondering, to refer to the something else press, if that, in Dick Higgins' case, could we use the term Trojan horse, in publishing, if this strategy of Dick Higgins wasn't to enter ideas through the book itself, the way he made it, he designed it, he conceived it, he built it. It's a question for me. More than a statement. I'm wondering if it is not. Or if you would like to respond to the idea of authority, investigating the term authority in its plurality in relation to each of your practice.
I would answer one little part of that, which is actually a question as well. Which I described why I like PDFs, and I'm curious in publishing on the internet, that question of Dick Higgins entering through the authoritative form of the book. The authoritative form of the internet is not so clearly, it's certainly not stable. So I talked about why I like PDFs. I wonder if you talk about why you like PDFs.
I like PDFs. I think I like what you had to say, and I think also, kind of like I was saying earlier, they do feel like something that's a bit in between, just like a website, something that you can, you scroll, you can just kind of go away, you can link, click on a link and suddenly you're somewhere else. It's this kind of like third way between like print and screen, even though it's like very much anchored in that. I kind of like the way, I guess I haven't seen much of this or anymore, but the way that it can be anchored with material objects, like through a USB or something. You can, sell a magazine that is on a USB stick and it can be a PDF, that kind of thing. But to not answer that question further and think of, because that's really all I have to say about that, but to think about like another valence of authority that we deal with the journal has to do with language and just the English language and the way in which that has become just like the authoritative language in the art world, say. publication, sort of lambasted the use of international art English and Eflex's announcements, just kind of like pointing to what they felt was the ridiculousness of it. Just like art speak and kind of the maybe increasingly opaque language that happens in press releases, etc. But then there was this huge response by Eflex journal authors that was defending that, and a lot of them pointed to this kind of, this sort of authority of the English language, and a lot of these artists and so on having to deal with English as a second language and some of this, absurd or opaque language coming out of that. And so I think that there's a way in which publications and publishers can sort of, whether it's through translation or just working, closely with authors who might not speak or write primarily in English, but to work harder maybe with them to make their work super understandable is a way of kind of not challenging obviously the authority of English, but just kind of dealing with it.
I was just going to add something about PDFs, because we also publish them as well, and we publish them far less than we do normal books or conventional books. And it sort of started with Cecilia, whom we've gotten our name from, but we wanted to reprint many of his sort of canonical catalogs from the late 60s, and he told us no, and he said he didn't believe in books anymore, and it's sort of a bit of a story which I won't go into, but we eventually arrived at the idea that because we had published a PDF of the artist's contract that did exceptionally well and was downloaded maybe 20,000 times in a couple of months or something, and he was very impressed by that. So he said, I'll let you reprint or publish these works from the 60s, but only as PDFs, and they have to be free. And I'll give you $5,000 to support your labor and provide you with books, essentially, which was incredibly generous, particularly for us at the time. This was in 2008, 9, and 10. And then we ended up publishing several of those works, and there's a book of his called the Xerox book, or that's what's known as anyways, and we published that as a PDF, and I think it was downloaded maybe 50 or 60,000 times in a month, or in 6 weeks, something insane like that. And it was a bit of an eye-opener in a way, I think, for both him and for us, in terms of how accessible the PDF format can be, and the potential of that format within the framework of what we're doing. What we're doing doesn't always fit the PDF format, but when it can, and we can put it online, it's a great thing to do. It's not without its problems. I often wonder how many Russian bots are really well versed in conceptual art from the late 60s. I'm not sure, but it was kind of groundbreaking for us.
I'm really bad at projecting, but I've been thinking a lot about it. So you said this question that you don't necessarily need to create public, make something public so much as vice versa. You don't really need to make something public so much as create it public, because there's so much noise and Kaye about this stuff as well with sort of sea of media. And I guess this all ties to the production of value. And I guess Julia, correct me if I'm wrong, the Steel History and the Flux Shop, they never sold the same thing. Not one of them, right?
Well, they sold a few things, but not enough to speak
So
about.
I guess the interesting thing about something else press, and not to draw influences between those two things, is that the whole thing is funded by Nick. We found this out in the last few days of this conference. It was all kind of his fortune from Steel, Coca-Cola. But the point is that he still had to sell books. The other thing that's very different, and we're about how different it is today than 1974, but the idea of how to create the value you need to continue doing what you're doing by the creation of this public is completely different in every project out here. So I wonder how that's navigated. It's not so much selling books,
because it has this amazing reputation. And we talk about value as monetary unit, but we also talk about it as intellectual and aesthetic value. And these things are really kind of blurred in terms. As the aesthetic value is recognized, the monetary value increases generally. But another way of framing this, another way of framing this is to think about MoMA's collection. And you can think about the early four mirrors, Picasso painting came to the collection about a year and a half after it was created. I want to say 1936, it was a 34 painting. And if you go back on MoMA.org and look at the installation views of that painting, it's almost incredibly static, that it's contextualized in the exact same place, within the exact same framework of other works, even when it's shown in special exhibitions, temporary shows. It's once again just sort of homogenized. It's that insular image. And to expand that and think about MoMA's collection at large, that one of the reasons why it has attained value has less to do with the physical structure and the ambiance of MoMA is the fact that it's immovable. This stuff is really static, and maybe in a couple of weeks when MoMA reopens, this will all change. But we come to think of these things as having value because they become part of our lexicon. And that lexicon is focused around things that we're familiar with. And what troubles me is that the exceptions to these rules are often very temporary. That in MoMA 3 years ago, after Trump's election and the whole issue of immigration became ahead, MoMA for an extended period of time, I think it was about a year and a half, put up punctuation marks within the permanent collection on the 5th floor of works that would possibly fit into the 5th floor, except that they're not part of the canon. Which is to say, there are these works that theoretically could be part of the canon, but MoMA has kept them in the basement, and temporarily they're on view. So what happens at the end of the year, those pieces come off view, and the collection more or less reverses back to the static picture. So the problem becomes, how do you expand upon the collection? This is emblematic of publishing as well. How do you expand upon these notions of value by permanently inserting the alternative into the story and changing that from being alternative to changing it to part of the major story itself? And that's why things shouldn't be temporary. That's why things need to be made permanent. That's why we need to expand our conversation to not say that, oh, asterisk this, but to say this.
So going off of the asterisk there, now that you guys have successfully run your presses and businesses for so long, I wonder how you factor in kind of artistic exploration and doing things that are risky, and whether or not that's baked into the artistic process, or whether or not you need to make it site-specific, and whether or not that's important to you in your press.
I can speak to that for a second. I mean, prime information is, when it comes to contemporary projects, we choose to work with an artist, and we let them do what they want. I mean, we're there to help them. We're there. I mean, we'll design them. We'll help an artist design a book if they want it, but if they don't want it, then we don't help them. I mean, we're there to guide and offer advice if needed. And I think sometimes those projects are successful, and sometimes they're not. And it doesn't really matter in the end, because we're not for profit. We're a nonprofit, so losing money is built into everything we do, and we consistently do that. I would say with most projects. So but I mean, some of those projects are very successful financially. I mean, they'll sell out or something like that. But for the most part, we're there to provide a platform. I mean, our platform for contemporary artists is built on this sort of historical framework that we built out through this other process. And I think, we're just there to give it to artists essentially. So. That said, we don't have a lot of money, so there's very few artists that get that platform. I think that's where the bigger issue is. It's like not enough money to sort of like have. I mean, I don't know that expansion is always the best, but I think it would be great if we could help more contemporary artists in that capacity. there are more opportunities for contemporary artists in that capacity. So I think those opportunities are shrinking over the years.
I mean, I hear your question as how do you keep a practice like this moving? And I know in my own experience, it's by continually kind of uprooting the practical circumstances under which it operates. So whether it's the people involved in it or the places where you do projects, I think that helps. Just to not have it become anything close to a road. Because since these are a love project, I mean, we're all losing money. This is not a sustainable thing that we're doing. And so we're doing it for other reasons. So keeping it moving, I think, is essential for me. You know, it never follows the trajectory, but hopefully other factors are consistent.
I kind of wanted to ask Matvei about this a little bit, just because you're working with a collective body, and many of the participants are practitioners as well, artists, poets. How does that factor into MVP?
Sure. Thanks. Well, yeah, with poet publishers, or basically, with small press tradition, you have usually writers publishing other writers' work, and that's true in artist book publishing a lot of the time, though it can be slightly different in terms of the support structure. We have a volunteer collective of about 9 or 10 editors right now, meaning all of the editorial work of choosing the books, working with the authors, designing the books frequently is a volunteer effort. That said, there are reasons for that are financial, there are reasons for that are like historical for the press, because we didn't start with some Whisker Steel money, as Higgins did, so we started with some student loans and this and that, out-of-pocket paying authors and so forth. And that has been important to us because it suggests that the choices of what we do have to be about very personal investment for the editors, because otherwise it becomes a question of choice of economic, or someone was asking, sort of like, is this going to work? Is this project going to fly? Is this going to, that's really not. Our aim is to, once the thing is decided, we make it work to the best of our ability, put it into a interesting group of other publications, so that there's some bouncing off of ideas. We make events with those authors, or translators, or historical work to connect with new work. Basically you're sort of curating an audience, or letting an audience know how they might approach something that isn't really known. Uruguayan poet from the 70s, or I don't know, or a contemporary poet who's really bad at social media and doesn't, and that's the kind of person we often like, is like people who are on platforms, and what publishing mostly now is built on is platforms in the commercial world. So, but I think I wanted to connect, you had asked about the collective thing, the whole thing you were talking about was, moving, what was the question originally? About keeping the practice. So, but what I wanted to connect this to is the fact that, in an earlier question especially about, and kind of the theme here, and I think what David has said is really important about keeping things permanent or static for long enough that they actually become part of the conversation. For that, you need to keep books in print and in circulation. With small press books, that's pretty tricky. So you have to you can't just do the conversation once, you have to keep including that book in the conversation next year, and bring that author back from 5 years ago, and keep posting about their events 10 years later, and after we haven't even worked with them for 10 years, so that continues to be part of the conversation, support their work at other publishing houses, etc. But I think what's at the base of that, and this is why I really am pretty strident in thinking that Dick wasn't slipping anything in, and Dick wasn't being obsequious about the book, because he was really, and when we start to use that terminology, I undercut the endeavor and make it a kind of like another Fluxus joke. But if you read how depressed he was about losing the press, giving up the press, and the minutiae of the economics that he understood, and where he understood he was losing money and how, I think you can see that he was actually really invested in the book form and in its distributability, its sociability, all of these things that we understand. Not as an artist practice, which is a cynical way to talk about it actually, because that we can have the talk about artistic practice and publishing from a very privileged point of view, not from a point of view of necessity, and which I think Higgins comes out of, necessity to see something through in a way that he thought Fluxus editions weren't doing. And to see that through, he gave 10 years, and he had a breakdown afterwards. So I think it's important that he wasn't just, he wouldn't have lamented a joke that wasn't successful. It was a serious thing. And the structures of funding that were started to exist in '68 and would have probably maybe helped them if they didn't have the huge tax bill, but and all those other problems. But there was a point when small press publishing was extremely diverse in this country, and that had a lot to do with NEA funding distributed not by the NEA but by forces like the CCLM, Coordinating Council of Literary Magazines, which dispersed, because NEA didn't know, they just started in '68. They were like, we need some people who are on the ground who know who to give this money to. And they would give micro grants, $700, whatever. They could fund a magazine for 2 years, and they did that so broadly that there was a much larger diversity of authorship in terms of people of color, in terms of women, to a degree in that moment. Certainly much larger than it is now, and we are focused on a few figures, whether in our world or in the literary world, where all the investment is going, right? All the investment, all the advertising, all of the grant funding. It's actually like a very complex pyramid structure that actually puts into the public view only a few visible, new faces, and it's a very interesting strategy that is connected to the narrowing of grant funding away from small organizations, grant funding, corporate funding, foundation funding toward professionalized and non-grassroots initiatives. Because obviously, like if you're a small group in Detroit, a writing group, you don't know anybody with money. And that's where public funding is super important. And that is what's totally eviscerated. You may think it exists, but it really doesn't exist. $65,000 of NEA money went to small presses this year. Like if you really think about what a small press is. And think about how much money, James, I hate to say this, but like how much money would you get in a grant for a book like Avalanche or something? Like, one project that is very, or like women's,
We didn't get any grant money for any of those projects.
You didn't?
No, not specifically.
Foundation money? Nothing?
No. Foundation money is really dried up on the visual arts side.
Okay, Warhol money or something. There's nothing? And you were saying
for specific, for a specific.
For just any specific project you want to mention?
I'd have to defer to Matthew. Matthew, what's the last project we got money for that was an individual project?
Like a grant specific.
Because you're not really like a specific, but
$5,000.
Maybe that's not important because you have funding for the organization for your program.
Yeah, we do, but it's only about, it's less than 30% of our operating costs.
Right. So mostly it comes from sales. So 70% comes from sales?
No, another 30 or so comes from sales, and then others come from
donations
and like fundraising additions.
Yeah. So the opportunities I'm talking about exist because grants in the literary arts are, for the most part, per project. And so if you can't convince grant makers to say that this book by an unknown person is worth publishing, you have nothing because you don't have art editions, you don't have structures that support a slightly more our world, slightly more moneyed space that can support smaller initiatives to some degree, at least to pay some overhead, some salaries, some production money, right? So in the literary small press, we have a really difficult situation for in this last, I'd say 18, 19 years, really. I mean, Clinton cut that in half, so you could start there in 95.
So we've been sitting now for close to 3 hours in chairs that are designed for no more than 2 hours. It adds up. I had a summer job where we had to sit in chairs for as long as you could possibly stand in. These chairs are rated at 2 hours. I don't want to end on a downer.
Sorry, guys.
But I think that it's probably a wise moment to stop. I want to thank our panel